I thought that the best place to start would be taking a moment just to, at least for me, to honor how epic it is that I'm sitting here now with you in a world that feels completely real, with me being real and you being real, every dimension of the universe being preciously real, which is something that 7 years ago, when I first stumbled onto your work, I didn't and thought that I never would again. So that's a big deal. And
That,
we explore all of these profound ideas and experiences, and we're deconstructing philosophies and exploring new ones. I sometimes lose sight of how profoundly significant it all is in light of my journey, which overlaps with yours in some ways, having found you at a time when I was really deep into the ego dissolution type of self and world. I say negating, but now I feel like it's helpful to say self and world trivializing forms of negating.
ooh, that's an interesting
It's not always
difference.
negation, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Trivializing. That's
Yeah.
a really good word.
I think it captures the spectrum because people can say this strand of non-duality says that reality isn't totally unreal.
It's certainly the opposite of where I've ended up, that's for sure, which is the opposite struggle, is to realize just how significant it actually is.
Yeah.
And the fact that it feels in our everyday lives, we devalue it,
Yes.
not overvalue it.
Yeah. Yep. And that's what's such a shock sometimes to think back to a time when I
Yeah.
was immersed in a spiritual worldview that taught so hardcore that your life doesn't matter. Your life is not significant. It's not real anyway. The world is an illusion or a delusion, and it's something to escape from, detach from, to be free from suffering, to know the ultimate truth, to be enlightened, etc. So I'm just felt good to take a little trip down memory lane to put into light where we are now in
Yeah.
terms of us having overlaps and what we want to contribute. I think one way to describe it is constructively deconstructing these non-dual paradigms that are self and world, either denying or trivializing. And maybe you have a different way of saying that.
Yeah. It's been fascinating for me because through my connection primarily with you and then on to a whole load of people, yeah, I've realized I guess for me it was more of a philosophical thing. It was like I felt like it hadn't. I wasn't experiencing it as harmful. I just found it distasteful and increasingly wrong. And I always found the no self stuff really, and what it was doing to people was not good. But I hadn't
Yeah.
taken on just how harmful it was. So it's been fascinating to try and to play a role in people and the work you're doing, which I think is fabulous, of being able to go, okay, let's help people recover from that and hopefully come into something really good because it's like you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
That's an important thing I think that we'll talk about is how to leave behind the worst of these paradigms while keeping the best,
Yeah.
something new. But I guess I was going to say that our kind of inspiration to deconstruct these types of non-dual paradigms and explore something humanistic that celebrates individuality and a real evolving world at the same time as unity and having deep awe and wonder and all of that, that for you it's come more as this philosophical rigor because you are at the end of the day, or the beginning and the end of the day, a
And all day.
that's your passion in life. I'm sure you have many, but you.
And for the reason that you said right at the start, Jessica, because it's not like doing a jigsaw puzzle. It's changing your actual experience of existence.
Right. Yes, because a lot of people will say you're just kicking around words and philosophy, but philosophy directly changes
your
how you
experience.
experienced and
Yeah.
perceived. It was through philosophy and what it pointed to that lost my sense of self,
Yeah.
and that I experienced reality as just a dream and experienced profound liberation, as well as, which is something I was going to say before, was that where I'm coming from is being somebody who did follow these Eastern, and I say neo-advaita a lot, but really there's the melange these days of sort of instant enlightenment. And they're influenced by Advaita, but also parts of Buddhism. Following those pointers led to a profound, radical shift in the way I perceived myself in reality, where there was this absence of me and the world is just this illusion arising within what you really are as pure awareness, and experiencing both this, what feels like this rare kind of boundless liberation and kind of invulnerability. At the same time, I later realized how limiting it was, and that it also was its own form of trap that was at once liberating as well as dehumanizing, and eventually lost my soul to it in a way. And
Mm.
for
Oh,
me, what I'm doing and what you're connecting with you 7 years ago and starting to follow your shift in your journey away from that model as well has really been a process of rebirth.
and that has been quite a journey. I was just because when you were talking, I remembered something which haven't remembered for ages, which must have been 25 years ago when I was just experimenting myself with no self.
Mm-hmm.
And where it would end up for me was not the same as neo-advaita, but and I remember with my dear friend and co-author Peter Gandy, we were running one of our very first events around the experience of gnosis,
Mm-hmm.
and we were both exploring the idea of the no self, and we led this meditation. It was probably me, I suspect, but and this woman who was part of the group just shouted out in the middle of the meditation, "You're trying to kill my soul!" And it was like, "Whoa!" and but I'd never had it before or since that
Yeah.
anything like that has ever happened. But looking back, I'm full of admiration for her
Yeah.
because she could see where this was potentially going and was just going, "No, don't go there." And she was right. She was
Right.
right. Just even the way that we were exploring, pointing people's attention, and she had spotted. And she wasn't coming from a philosophical place, it was coming from an experiential place. And that's a really, you don't want to kill yourself.
But when we're suffering and we come to these paradigms, this is something darker that I've been posting some videos on lately, is that a lot of these paradigms, the messaging is you want to die because you're miserable, but you don't have to kill yourself physically. You can follow these teachings, realize that the one who wants to die doesn't actually exist, and then you will have this life free from suffering and be liberated. And so, on one hand, we can say that now, saying, don't do that to yourself. However, at the same time, acknowledge the strong attraction of
Oh, massive. And also historically, I think
side kind of
it's really
viewpoint.
good to see how things evolve and with everything. And the ideas have been around one form or another, obviously all the different ones for you can trace them back and back. But the modern, the idea that we can make the world better and make ourselves better and all those sort of ideas, these are relatively modern.
Yeah.
And before that, people are living brutal short lives in which most of their kids will die. And it's a lot of routine brutality, massive injustice everywhere. I completely understand why you might have a negative view of the world. And when I was studying the ancient world around the time of the creation of Christianity, what really struck me was those who were quite well off had a more positive view of awakening, and those that weren't had a much more negative view of it, that it was about escaping. This was hell, and it was a way to escape it. And I think this is all completely understandable. But we've now got this great idea that we can actually make this, and we have, just immeasurably better. And a lot of that's come by questioning this very negative version of spirituality, which it arose in all sorts of places, not just India. And I'm sure was took things forward at the time, and then, but now it's time to leave it behind.
I will say, just because I feel like it's always important to put in there that, yes, the times are so different and we have so much, the quality of life now, of course, in our modern Western society is exponentially greater. A lot of times the people who come to these teachings and who the teachings even seem to present themselves for are people that feel like no matter how good their lives may be on the outside, they're
Yes,
suffering some type of internal mental hell.
of course,
I
and
can
suffering.
relate.
Yeah, and suffering can is not it is oh it's a relative thing for one thing, and it's rife obviously as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And that sets the stage for, oh, kill the one who's suffering to,
Yes, and also the mind. It's if your mind is or your body, if it's causing you to suffer, then I
right.
think it's easy for somebody to go, oh, well, that's because you need to stop thinking, and if you stop
Yeah,
thinking, you can't consider anything, and if you get
exactly.
involved in a doctrine that you can't consider, you'll never get out, because the only way to get out is to reflect on it and doubt it.
Yes.
So you've got an awful vicious circle right there.
Yeah.
I was
This,
thinking the other day, sorry, just because it just came into my mind
yeah.
just the other day, I was thinking about Eckhart Tolle, I never know which it is, who, and that whole power of now and all of that stuff, and his story with his mental health, and that he got through it, good for him, and came out the other end with this message of be in the present moment and don't get caught up in your thoughts. And I understand that completely. But the great irony, of course, is that you can only get to these things. He got there through his thoughts. He got there by reading books, by talking to people about doing all these things, was able to get the idea. And then when he wanted to give that idea to other people, he did it with ideas because that's all we've got. And so it's a kind of, there's something about these approaches to existence which is just not very well thought through. They're superficial. And because of that, they're easy to grasp at first, and then they lead to a dead end because they don't go deep enough. They can't engage with what life's really.
I think, yeah, it's still continuing to set the stage for what's to come. I think it's just really important, again, to reflect on how immensely needed it is right now for humanistic paradigms of spirituality that people can engage with, whether they're suffering or not, that is an alternative to this such a popular movement towards these older models of Eastern spirituality that are repackaged as something new, whether that's neo-advaita, but this whole idea that the truth that's going to set you free, follow these pointers to have X, Y, and Z realizations about the ultimate truth of reality, and then you're free. That are nihilistic and anti-ego and anti-individual, but paradigms that can, as what you're doing, is rescuing the ego, redeeming the individual. And so for what I'm doing, which I sometimes call, and I have a support group that's called Collective Soul Revival, your world views and your ideas have been an instrumental part of, is people who want to move away from these negation-based non-dual paradigms, whether it's because they've only been damaged by them, which we now know is a huge widespread thing, or there are people like myself who experienced these radical shifts and found them immensely positive up until a certain point, until the dark side showed itself and this kind of double-edged sword, and then this sort of, fuck, what do I do now? Is it possible to re-embrace the self in some way without going back to sleep, if you will? But people who, yeah, who are looking for a way to feel real again in a world that feels real. So in a way to resurrect the reality of all dimensions of reality and humanity in a way that actually celebrates and makes our individual existence something precious
Beautifully put.
and
Yeah.
profound. Yeah.
Celebrate. And it is precious. It's the big turning point for me was having a daughter, and just like seeing that individuality and just how precious. And and so if we can really see that in each other, this feels, yeah, this is the sort of spirituality we want to take us forward.
And you, something that has always been so unique to you is, even though you were teaching, if you will, let's say when you wrote Lucid Living, for example, you were inspired by Nisargadatta and these non-dual perspectives, but you were always saying something that no one else was saying, which was, and the
Yeah,
individual matters,
yeah,
and this dream character is important, and life is something beautiful to fully participate in, which
yeah,
set you apart, of course, from everyone else at Sand when
yeah.
you went. And that was what drew me to you, because this was something extraordinary and stunning and like heretical in a way, if that's a word, heretical, I don't know,
Yeah, yeah,
heresy,
yeah.
that I had been immersed in this view that, yes, it's all a dream, and it's a dream we should escape. It's a dream that we should detach from. It's a dream that only leads to suffering. And that this dream character of you is something that's false, something that needs to be renounced or disidentified with, or at the worst, completely killed off and destroyed. So then you come along with this book, Lucid Living, that starts with something like, Psst, wake up, you're dreaming. And you were presenting to me this new view of, oh, maybe this doesn't have to be nihilistic and based on detachment. Maybe I can actually harness this view of life being a lucid dream within my awareness as inspiration to self-author my life and to be involved in it and participate in it. And so there were like these stepping stones that led me to where I am now, which is that reality is not a dream and it's worth participating in. And there's oneness, and we're precious individuals at the same time. And so following, what's just fascinating is all the shifts that you made from lucid living, which is where I started off with you, to where you are now, where you're also saying, reality is not just a dream. So it could be interesting maybe to start at lucid living.
Hmm.
As you said, this was inspired by Nisargadatta, where the core idea, maybe you want to say it, is that reality is an appearance within consciousness.
Yeah, yeah. And Nisargadatta was a big influence because he seemed at the time very clear. I'm not, he doesn't now, but there were lots, and I mean, and it's a perennial image. What it you go right back and right back. The Gnostics use it, all sorts use it, Sufis use it. And for me, it was a way of resolving the very tension you're talking about. Was I had a very powerful feeling that the individual was significant,
Mhm.
and yet I wanted to combine it with this experience I was having of profound oneness and love, and how do these fit together? And I had the vocabulary of the perennial philosophy with which to work, and therefore just homed in on the dream image to go, oh, look, like a dream, you're in it, and yet from a deeper perspective, it's in you, and
Mhm.
you're there. So there's one dreamer dreaming itself to be everyone, and it was a way of capturing the mythos of the perennial philosophy in a way that I could make the dream positive. And that was important to me because for me it's always been about love, and that's where the love is. But eventually it broke down, and I got it. The way it seems to me increasingly is I was able to express the essential ideas that I've been exploring for decades eventually so clearly that I could see what was wrong with them.
Right.
And that's what led me to go, okay, you've got to revise this considerably. And that was a huge wrench because I'd got very good at not only writing and talking about it, but it was very simple and clear. And I could give people experiential shifts. And it wasn't a negative thing. It was a positive shift into love. So it was a very positive thing. I developed it. I was good at it. The only problem was I think it's wrong.
Yes.
So that meant, okay.
And when we talk about what's wrong with it, or let's say the drawbacks to it, I will say that there's more than just that. And I don't think that you maybe particularly experienced it in the way that you specifically taught it. But what that perspective came with for me, as much as it redeemed participating and was inspiring me to engage in reality again, interpersonally, it's still at the end of the day had the tendency to lead to solipsism. And
If you actually follow through, that's one of the problems with it. If you follow through, it is solipsistic. And there was always a moment in the whole journey that I took people on and went on myself, where it reached that point where you kind of don't mention that. Somehow that doesn't quite work, but we'll move over it. And because if you're ultimately going, what you know is your experience right now, if that's where you're starting and ending, which is what I was doing, then that's solipsism. There's no way around it. And yeah, that's totally unsatisfactory. And then also, it's a dream. Okay, what are you trying to say with that? Really, it's a dream. It's like,
yeah,
is it? Because when I look at my dreams, they're full of images. What is it? What is it? An echo of? And you're asking an awful big jump to go. This all exists in some super consciousness. And increasingly there's other reasons it was wrong, but increasingly there was better ways to understand it. I was going, look, Tim and Jessica are dream characters within God's dream, essentially. So it's a revamped version of the ancient myth of the dream of Brahman, the dream of God, and that does work in a mythic context. But if you push it, if you want to get rid of the mythicism from it, if you ask difficult questions, then you've got a hell of a lot of problems on your hands as to what that could possibly actually mean.
right. So if we were to say, what is it that we're actually doing here? What is it that we're actually collaborating on? And I've started with one aspect of it is this, what I think of as constructively deconstructing these either or non-dual paradigms, self-negating non-dual paradigms, or enlightenment paradigms, but constructively deconstructing that philosophy and thus the experiences they lead to. And that's a huge part of what you've been doing over the last several years, right?
Yeah, yeah, massive part.
And with me, why it matters so much is because that was really an essential part of the pathway of reconstructing myself, I would say, from the ground up and this
Right.
rebirth process. And this is what I'm starting to support other people with. Because as we talk about a lot, one of the biggest reasons why people get so stuck in these non-dual viewpoints is because of the fact that we are so convinced they're the ultimate truth, which I
Yes.
was, I think you were too. And because we are so convinced of having those truths having been proven to us in our direct experience, that there's this whole other layer of impossibility of, I know this is true. So if I am to take on any other view, if I am to re-embrace the self, then I'm obviously going back into delusion. I'm going back asleep. And so what you've helped me with so much is this feeling of re-embracing the self in a real world without feeling like I'm going back to sleep. And
Yeah, I
that's
mean, I think the opposite. I
I feel
think
like,
you're waking up because I think the non-dual thing is a type of delusion, and when you see through it, it's like when you see through anything. It is like the waking up metaphor is because of that. That's also true when you got into it. It was a kind of waking up, I think, because you're living in your everyday life, and suddenly it's like, wow, you could see this completely differently. That's a really important and interesting thing to see.
yes. And
Then
it's
you
not,
step in, and you've gone from the world is the way that everyone sees it. It's an object that we're all in. Oh, no, it's all an appearance in consciousness. And both of them were what you experienced. It's just
mhm,
you've forgotten the old one, and that was a delusion. And now you got this one. And then to go, that one's not necessarily either. what the you can wake up from that one as well. And then there's another way of seeing things which can open up much greater choice in how you ideate this amazing thing we're in and look for what is the best understanding.
And it's felt really good to clarify that when I think of the shifts that non-dual pointers lead to, that of course, yes, they are pointing us to very real, profound shifts in how we perceive that are astonishing, that are transformative for better or for worse. That doesn't, we don't lose that reality. It's just that they're no longer, in my view, in your view, revealing anything called ultimate truth, nor are they the surefire way to free oneself from suffering.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of ultimate truth is one that would be interesting to explore what the hell that could possibly mean, because it gets very, I think people use the word truth in such strange and different ways, let alone the word ultimate. And there is what I, it's been very interesting for me because 24, 5 years ago, when I wrote the Jesus Mysteries,
Mm-hmm.
that unleashed a lot of attacks from Christian fundamentalists.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me now, even though I haven't written anything against non-duality, I've just done online things with yourself and others, I notice exactly the same mindset, this fundamentalist mindset. It's identical, and yet it's from fundamentalists.
Mm-hmm.
It's from non-dual people. And what you can see then is, it almost could be anything. That when you've come into something and formed a closed system around it, and then it's the ultimate truth. So if you think, look, Jesus is the Lord, that's the truth you don't understand, and it's in this book, and look, is the same as no, non-duality is it. And the how could you possibly doubt the ancient rishis and the enlightened masters, you arrogant idiot? You know, this is you just or I've experienced Jesus. I just know you just haven't had that experience. And I can go, well, I lived in a friary for actually a while and I had lots of experiences. Oh, you can't have had the experience then, because otherwise you'd be like me. And the same with the non. You say you've studied non-duality and had loads of experiences with things, but I don't think you can have, because otherwise you'd be like me and you'd know this was the truth. And so when you see that, it's like, there's a way, however you're, I'm sure it's true of Maoists. I'm sure it's true of it's political. It's like anything becomes a closed system. You've bought into it, and that's the way. It's self-evident to you because that's because you're actually experiencing it, but you're experiencing through those particular ideas, and therefore it seems indisputable to you. And that, to me, is not a sign of ultimate truth. If you don't realize that you could be wrong, you have no idea what we're in, because what we're in is so mysterious and so enormous in every way that the rock, the foundation, surely must be a deep respect to mystery and not knowing. And then from that, to develop the best way of understanding you can. And especially if you've already been in an understanding, like everyday life, like we all grow up in a culture. And to come to these things, you have to question your culture. That's a big thing to do. And you've
Mm-hmm.
ended up in a different culture. Surely don't forget that you had to question your culture here, because then
Yeah.
you can carry on questioning your culture here, and that will then your journey will continue. And if what you find is good when you question it, hurrah.
So I don't think that I've gotten down to this nuance with you before. And I think it's really important because when you make the parallels to, oh, it's just saying Jesus or Jesus is the ultimate truth or what have you, that there's something, there's such an convincing illusion in this whole direct knowing where it feels like the opposite of dogma. It seems like the opposite of taking on secondhand truth from someone else, because you can say to someone, and what is said to you is, don't take it from me. Don't do what people do in church where they just hear Jesus is the Lord Savior and then accept it on blind faith. Go check out in your firsthand experience. You can't just get this by listening to my words. You have to find it for yourself. So it gives this illusion.
This is identical, though, isn't it? It's like that's a caricature of Christianity, Because actually what's happening in these super mega churches is that people are having ecstatic experiences and talking in tongues,
Right.
strange languages, which then someone else is translating as some prophecy. And wow, you want experience? You're there, you're shaking, you're talking in some strange language. Someone's saying, "Oh, this means this is going to happen." These are full-on experiences. This is not someone just sitting there going, "Yes, I just believe it." These are in all of these areas. It could be any religion, it could be anything at all. These experiences follow, and so anyone could say that exactly the same thing. The question is that when the realization is that the experiences can be just self-verifying, just that the way you're ideating reality will issue, and it's all nearly all unconscious. So the fact that you're not thinking about it, you're not choosing it, but it's happening anyway. And the ability to notice that and still keep an openness. I'm not certainly in the business of coming into people who've got a non-dual view and going, you must give it up. It's like, no. But I would say it would be much healthier if you were able to hold it in enough mystery that you could go, I could be wrong, and there might be a better way. And that allows a kind of softness around the ideas where you can engage, for one thing, and you can question yourself,
Mhm.
and you can potentially move beyond it. And the understanding that if that were to happen to you in the future, it would be the thing you couldn't see now that you would see. So the fact that you can't see it right now doesn't mean anything, because it will only be when you see what you couldn't see before that you feel that, oh God. And that's what happened to me. And I was in my 50s, so it took me a long time to see what was wrong with it.
Just the idea of non-conceptual truth or non-conceptual ultimate truth puts it in a different category, wouldn't you say, than something like Christianity? Because we're saying the truth isn't something non-conceptual that words can never touch.
That, yes, although I think in Christianity there'd be that God is beyond all, God moves in mysterious ways, all of that stuff. You can't, it's too big for you to think about. All of that is there. The big thing with the non-dual thing is that it has focused in on the mind as a problem, and that's the particular place you get that is in Indian thought. Is that the and what do they mean by that? Do they there's two things that we can mean by that, and they're very different. One is thinking, talking to ourselves, and the idea that that's a distraction.
Mm.
And the other is actually ideating, by which I mean categorizing our experience. Like behind me is a plant, and there's a picture, and then some books, and then everything is, I know what they are. And when you're Jessica and I'm on Zoom, and all of that ability to tell this from that. And it's only by being able to tell this from that I can experience this, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to separate this from that. And if the message is, look, to go deep into meditation or whatever, you need to stop talking to yourself, I think that's probably right. If you want to question your beliefs, you need to talk to yourself. So if you're into non-duality and you want to see a way out, you need to look at it, which is to reflect. But if you want to go into the experience, then don't do that. Put your attention somewhere else. But that doesn't mean that what you're focusing on, the mere fact that you can say it's an experience of oneness, not separateness, or it's an experience of, say, let's say, love, not terror, means you can tell them apart. So you must have a category for that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you couldn't tell them apart. So ideation is happening. You're just not talking to yourself. And it's India in particular that has got this, what now seems very outdated psychology, which tends to demonize the mind. It's also because India historically, if you look at the West, you could say it's been one big cult. The whole Catholic thing for ages, and then all the Protestant ones, which were very various versions of it. But it was one big cult. Whereas India has been much more fluid and not like that, and it's just been lots of little cults. And
Yeah.
and each cult is led by whoever's alive at the time. It's not always just the dead guy. It's also, and that was what was so attractive. We didn't have that, but they've got living ones who are living saints and enlightened masters, and you can find them. And if you're and what's made that work is a kind of three really bad ideas that fit together. which is the idea that there's an ultimate escape called enlightenment that only some people have experienced. The idea that what's in the way of you experiencing it is you or your mind, one or both. And that because you're fighting with yourself, you need someone outside of you who has experience to guide you. And that's the guru or the teacher or whatever. And you're powerless, really, because you're fighting yourself. And the thing in you that's fighting knows it's going to have to die. And so it's fighting for its life. It will do everything to stop you. Oh, God. So you're now in a civil war with yourself. Your only hope is this other person who's outside of you, who knows, who can help you. And your only relief is to reach this state of enlightenment. That's the perfect way to set up a cult. And that's why it's survived for so long. Because within that paradigm, your individuality is lost and your ability to reflect is gone. The ability to reflect is there's also in Christianity and all the other religions. If you reflect, that's the devil. Or in Islam, if you reflect, we'll kill you. it's, it's what makes all of them work.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's so unique, though, to being the type of, I would say, indoctrination that goes on in this type of non-duality is that it's so central and so core to it that the ego, the mind, rationality, not just that it causes suffering, but that it's illegitimate, that it's invalid, that it's non-existent. So the moment you try to use those things, you're proving your own delusion, you're proving your own ignorance, you're proving that you're trapped in it. So you're really having those self-reflection taken off the table as a tool, a valid tool for you to use.
Oh,
So
totally.
you want to get out of this, you have to use self-reflection. But that massive hurdle is that, yeah, but self-reflection itself is invalid. It's been invalidated. It's been seen through as not real or just the ego. And so you need more in order to get on board with self-reflection again. And so for me, I think part of what your philosophy has offered is reaffirming or affirming the reality of thought and of the mind and of the self through this emergent flip
Yeah.
from reductionism to emergentism, which are these fancy words. But a massive turning point was, oh, a way to really understand these non-dual paradigms is that they're all reductionists. So they're all saying that what's the most essential or foundational level of something is its true nature, or is the real truth of what it is. So that the reality of thoughts can all be reduced to the ground of being, whether that's considered awareness or emptiness or God or what have you. But that's the whole viewpoint that I was ushered into, was everything's collapsing into truth. So the mind becomes this flimsy thing that has no legs to stand on, if you will. So maybe you could share this flip from reductionist view to what is the emergent view, and how does that help us to gain back the validity of the self, thoughts, self-reflection, all of that.
Yeah. There's the reductionist view which reduces it all to really it's all just the presence of consciousness or whatever it is, like you've just outlined it, and this is some sort of illusion that's arising. God has fallen into this terrible predicament where he thinks he's Tim, and if only he could wake up, he'd realize he's not Tim, and everything would be all right. There's that view, and then there's a scientific view, which is Tim's here talking away as if he's making these choices, but really it's all just happening. It's all just atoms doing their thing. And the emergentist view, as the word, is the opposite to both of those. It's going, look, what we're in is a process of creative forming in which every new moment is a novel occurrence based on what's been before. And the current understanding that we have of the universe is that that's been happening for 14 billion odd years. And it's got us from the simplest thing you can possibly imagine to us having a conversation about the nature of the universe. Wow. Absolutely wow. And then what that does is it goes, okay, so that in that process there will be things about what makes a human being which we need to leave behind, and there'll be things which, wow, that's how amazing we've got that. And one of the things which is absolutely amazing is that obviously that we are conscious, that we can sense the world, that the universe has evolved into forms that can look at the universe, and then that we've got the psyche, the soul, where we can reflect on how we see the universe. One of the lines I love, it's not mine, what's the difference between us and the cave people is ideas. We've just got a whole load of ideas, which mean we can communicate on Zoom, and they were just trying to make an axe. And all of that has happened in the psyche. And the key to the evolution of the psyche has been our ability to reflect, which is to communicate between each other, to have a conversation like this, and then to be able to talk to ourselves so that we can reflect on our own. Amazing. And that's thought. How fantastic. Now, just like in a conversation, we could talk rubbish or we could be angry and horrible to each other. Still be talking. And you can do that to yourself. You can talk, and that's when the mind becomes a negative, where you're just saying the same old thing, or you're being horrible to yourself or to somebody else. But the thing in itself, the power of it is it's that you can reflect on what you're doing and how you're seeing the world, which means it can evolve.
Yeah.
So if someone's listening to our conversation and they're thinking, oh, could that mean that some way I've seen the world before might perhaps be not as good as I thought? Well, that's reflection.
Yeah.
And that's why the openness rather than a closed system is so important, because the openness allows for the reflection. And that's what it is that's why we're evolving. So the emergentist view is the whole damn thing's evolving. And those, for me, those spiritual experiences, which have been the focus of my attention literally all my life, because they're so important, so amazing and beautiful, they're not about escaping this. They're actually the next level of this.
Mm.
They're this. They've got us from, we're alive, we're conscious, we've got the soul, we've got reflection. Aha. And now we can recognize that actually the universe is a one, it's a universe. And although I'm Tim, I'm actually embedded in and arising from the universe. And that lovely insight which we've got from science is that literally the carbon and the in my body comes from ancient stars. I'm stardust. That's blow your mind. And yet it's true. And we've evolved through all of these levels of life to get to this. And now we can look at it and reflect it and go, oh, hang on, in a very real sense that I can experience, there's one of us, but there's one of us exploring itself from all these different perspectives. And our individuality, far from being in the way, is the thing which actually allows us to go to the next level. And that's the shift that I talk about as an individual to a unividual, which is an individual conscious of that unity, not by negating the individual, but by taking the individual to the next level.
Yes, and that's what I loved so much, will always stick with me, was when you said you don't get to oneness by erasing yourself, because that would be oneness for the whole in it. So one of the very, very core things that I just utterly savor about your unividual philosophy is that experience of having gone from this paradigm where a oneness of disappearance, where oneness is the negation of you or disappearing into the universe. Whereas now we can experience this oneness as individuals. So oneness with a whole human in it. And then
Mm.
we get to these experiences where we get to share in the transcendent. So like we've said before, there's that whole narrative that, oh, there's no one there who wakes up to oneness. Once you wake up to oneness, you realize there was no one to wake up to oneness anyway. Whereas this is saying, no, don't negate yourself. You can experience oneness, but don't erase yourself from the picture. Stay within it. And then we're able to share in this greater than that we are. And that's a whole different experience.
Yeah, that is the beautiful both and that you use in your work. It's not either or with a lot of these things.
Mhm.
If you can see, sometimes things look like they're contradictory and they're not. They're actually complementary. And to look around you and go, it's a universe. It's a one thing. But look, it's full of these individual systems or forms which exist in their own unique way, including me and you. And when you get that, they sit together. Now,
Yeah.
if your sense of who you are is I'm just this little skin bag, as Alan Watts used to call it, then you'll feel that you'll be quite isolated. But if your sense of identity expands to go, look, I'm the whole thing, arising as Tim,
Yes.
interacting with it, the whole thing, and that I am a contributor
Yeah.
to this evolutionary process that's been going on for the 14 billion years. And the leading edge of that process is right now. This is it. This is it. And I, every moment, get to decide what am I going to do with the leading edge of the evolutionary process, which is, this is it now. And suddenly you're in your life. The project I'm working on is it's called Your Life Really Matters, Why Your Life Really Matters. And it's because that's your life. And the fact that you can do so much with it. But one of the things that you can do, which will have a big effect, is to experience these mystical states, which
Mhm.
is all these traditions have been exploring quite rightly for a long time, but see them, understand them in a different way. It's like I suspect that the experience that I have of listening to thunder and watching lightning is not that different to the ancient Vikings. But with it, they had an understanding which was utterly different.
Yeah.
And so they experienced it as like an angry thing, or,
Bubbling.
all of these thunder gods.
Mhm.
Yahweh's a thunder god. It's like thunder gods, angry thunder god. I don't do that. It doesn't, for one moment, do I hear the thunder and think, oh, there's a god's angry. That doesn't cross my mind. And that's because we're discerning the same thing, but our understanding, and that would, and because the understanding is so radically different, the experience is different. So you can experience oneness with an understanding that, oh, you must lose separateness and what will happen, I suspect, for most people is there'll be moments where your attention is so sucked into something, it'll seem timeless, it'll seem transcendent, it'll be amazing, and then that will dissipate and you'll feel like, oh, I'm back to this.
Right.
Rather than because you're trying to get one without the other, and you can't have one without the other. You can move your attention around, but you can't have one without the other because they coexist. Whereas if you get that, what you find is that you're embedded in this oneness as an individual, and you're flowering within the oneness along with all of these other things which are also coming to fruition in the oneness.
Mhm.
And it's the one thing in relationship with itself in all these different forms. But you know, what you end up with then is that the very process you've been had the whole time, that's it. That's it. That life you've already living is immensely precious and significant. And you can understand the oneness, the same oneness that Rumi experienced, the same Rumi that Bodhidharma experienced. Of course, that will be the same. But we've moved on. We haven't got a thunder god, we've now got electromagnetism. We can move on too. Doesn't mean that we think we're better and wiser and they were all idiots. It just means that we're later. We've got the advantage of more time in
Mhm.
which we can understand more, and we can go, oh no, it's like this actually. We can re-understand it and go, no, it's about seeing that that's already seeing. It's about seeing the importance of our lives, not negating our lives,
Right.
which has been the theme of the conversation.
Yes. And it points to, I think, when we're talking about reductionism, where I will still use this phrase, the ground of being sometimes.
Mm.
Whereas in the past, the paradigm was what you really are is just the ground of being. That now what you're describing, if you still use a phrase like that at times, would be the ground of being becoming, that we're what it really has become and is still becoming.
Yeah, so there's a simple movement there, isn't there? Where and which is there's the phrase you use, which is one you'll hear a lot, obviously, which is what you really are is the ground of being or whatever it is. That's what you really are. That's the ultimate truth. That's the real thing. And then this is not what you really are. And then that developed for me, and I think the lucid living thing was more like that is what you really are, but it's conscious of itself through you.
True. Yes.
And then that moved to what I've arrived at now, which is, no, the ground of being is arising as you. You are not separate from it. It is, you are it. And for me, it's, if you imagine a clean sheet of paper, this is maybe a bit of a crass analogy, but if you imagine a clean sheet of paper with nothing on it, and then you draw lots of circles, and each circle is an individual, it's like it hasn't, the ground of paper hasn't been left behind. It's just now turned into all of these circles.
Yes.
But the circles are it individuating, and here we are. It is us. It's everything, and yet we are fulfilling a potential which it wasn't like who knew what it could be, but become this, and each new moment that potential can increase.
Those two letters, just as, makes such a big difference. So how would you, if you could just clarify a little bit more, when we talk about evolutionary paradigms,
Yeah.
you'll hear some of still reductionist non-dual paradigms that will take on this description of evolutionary, in the sense that what they're saying is that through this, let's say, potentially illusion of evolution, the ground of being or pure consciousness is now meeting itself through you.
Mm-hmm.
How is that different than as you? I mean, I sense that, but I think it's subtle and can.
The real difference, I think it is different, the through and the as. It is for me anyway, because the sense of with the through is it's really back here the whole time, and I'm
Yes.
like like a tube, and it's looking through me, and because the illusion is it thinks that it is me, and now it realizes, oh, I'm not really Tim, I'm just looking through Tim. Whereas what I'm saying is, no, it really is Tim.
It's your
You know,
eye.
I'm really Tim, you're really Jessica, and there's a oneness. But my oneness is not the same because with most, even when the language is quite simple, let's say, it's pure consciousness or something, whatever that could be. Is it? Because it sounds like that's what you really are. It's like, what does that even mean? You're really pure consciousness. So what? It's you got no quality. What it turns out, I think, is that pure thing that you really are is loving and wise. And hang on a second, now you've got loads of qualities. So it's a version of the God at the beginning of things.
Yeah.
And so what it's really going is the old myth that I shared. This is God's dream, really you're God. And that has all sorts of problems for me philosophically, because you're putting this amazing, you're explaining the universe with something even more mysterious. And that's what it does. So if God is realizing itself through the evolutionary process, which is the story I was telling, which is lovely in principle, can be, you still have that problem of it's all coming from something greater. And then you've explained the lesser, but you've done it with something greater. So you haven't really got anywhere. Whereas what I'm interested in is, what if everything that has any form whatsoever, any form, anything which is differentiated in any way, whether it's abstract like numbers, tactile like objects, or divine, and you think of it as divine love, anything which has a form, is part of one process of forming, which starts not with love, wisdom, and consciousness, but starts with the empty sheet of paper, starts with something which has no qualities, and in relationship to itself will develop all qualities. So you go there, the essence is not some amazing word. The essence, and interesting, the word essence means being, the essay, being, the essential nature of things in itself has no qualities. And in relationship, it can evolve all qualities. And so you wouldn't want to go, that's really what you are, because then you're going, you're nothing. Not in some nothing, just nothing.
Yeah, that's what so much of non-dual paradigms do say.
They can, yeah, they can. But there's always the feeling that if you realize you are nothing, it'd be amazing for you. You know? it's, it's all very confused. It's not very, it's, it works on a more poetic level. It sounds good. And that's mythic thinking. And mythic thinking is what we had for a long time. We need to move beyond it now. But it's it has that kind of, you listen. That's why when you listen to it, you come into some sort of, you listen to satsang long enough, and you come into a sort of daze where you're
Very much so.
entranced by the idea, and it's nice. You like it because it's reassuring, and there's the
And the
person who
language can
knows.
be so, yes, poetic, but mysterious. I love the shift in view to the self-reflective mind is an extraordinary feat of evolution to
Yeah,
celebrate. All of this is, rather than something to denigrate. I wanted you to go into the imaginal and
right.
how in the emergent view, this notion that the psyche level of reality where there's self-reflection and there's images and there's thoughts is an imaginal level of reality that is a real imaginal level of reality. And for me, imaginal is a big shift because instead of saying that something is just an image, it's saying no, it's imaginal. Its nature is an image. It's made of image, or that's the quality that it has, but it's really that.
Yes.
We could talk about the emergence of an imaginal level of reality that is real.
Yeah, I think you can see that the process of evolution has gone through various stages. One of the great insights of modern physics, and it's been really borne out in computerization, has been going that the fundamental idea that we need to understand differentiation, how the
Mm.
one differentiates, is information, and information is differentiation. So that's the fundamental idea. And then you can go, this information has been evolving onto different levels. And you get what looks like now a pre-physical level of information. You get physical information. You get biological information. And then you get this thing called, we call the psyche. The psyche, the word just means soul in a different, in the same word from different languages. It's a non-material experience you're having, and you're having it right now. And I'm sure I've done this with you before, but I love it because it's just so perfect. Is just to get, as anyone's listening to this, that what you're engaging with on a biological level, even if I'm digital on your screen, what you're hearing is a monkey making funny noises.
You're not a monkey.
Pretty much, not much different. And I'm making funny noises, and yet what? It's actually quite hard to actually hear just the noises because you're decoding the meaning, but there's no meaning in the noises. And what you can tell that because the noises are being transmuted through a microphone, through electronics, through the internet, and then they're arising, and then the speaker, and then the air, and then bang, suddenly. So all of that meaning is arising in the psyche. So you've got this other level of reality which has arisen. And I think it's where all of the spiritual experiences are happening. And I think spirituality has known that forever. That's what they call the spirit realm or the non-material realm, or all these fancy names. The Duat in ancient Egypt, the Bardos in Tibet, the Aluna in South America, all these different names. But what they're talking about is there's a domain which is made of images. And they're images from here. So you dream in there, you think in there, and if you pay it attention in meditation, or you pay it attention when you go to sleep, or you pay it attention with psychedelics or shamanic practices or any of those things, it's a really vivid place to be, and it's a level of reality. So if we can grasp that another level of reality, which you're in right now, you're always in it, has arisen from the biological, just miraculously in ways we can just about understand. Perhaps life arose from physics.
Mm.
Just as amazingly, then life became conscious and could see and hear, and wow, all right, did that. And then it became able to reflect on itself. And when it did that, the simplest, I'm pretty convinced that the way that will have started is through conscious memory.
Mm.
And so it's so that rather than all the unconscious memories, which are going on everywhere in all forms of life, you got conscious reflection on your memory. You're not actually experiencing the world. You're experiencing the past and
Mm.
what you have as an image. And then from those images, you can imagine. Now you've got imagination, and on it goes. And then when you've developed language, you've got all of that. And so my suspicion is what's happening is that domain has become very important. It's where we've spent the whole of this conversation. Not much has been happening physically. I throw my arms around, but apart from that, all the action has been, it's not in space. That's the soul. And as you know, one of the transformative practices for me that I love to do with people, and we're doing it here, is when you look at someone and you see their biology, but you recognize that what you're connecting with is their soul, is their psyche, which you can't see. So right now, the whole of this conversation, and with anyone else who's partaking in this later, something that you can't see is connecting with something you can't see. The soul is connecting with the soul. That's why this has been of value. So taking that level seriously seems, yeah, that's the way forward.
And not just to take it seriously, but it seems wild now to trivialize this dimension, because
Yeah.
you think about it with that lens of, wow, how, let's just throw that away. Understandable when we're suffering, but we have a choice to harness a different perspective on it that's optimistic, that's more positive, and that
The emergent view, when you said the difference, I mean, it's, to me, partly, this is why I've ended up with it, I think, probably, on my personal little journey. My experiences, right from when I was a kid, of those deep awake states, where you go, oh, it's all one, or sometimes you don't even think that. You can just, it's just love, or whatever it is, but you know that, wow, it's more than your everyday. Have always essentially been so optimistic. Like, for all of the terrible suffering, and there's lots of it, that there's something redeeming here. It's going to somewhere good that can redeem it, or there is something powerfully, the love especially, there's something powerfully redeeming about it. So I think why I've ended up with this emergent view of everything forming from the simplest into this richness is it's so optimistic. And it doesn't deny the negativity. It isn't naive. It goes, no, look, the evolutionary process has been brutal, and we're still living with illness and death and suffering and meaningless actions. And some people are still living in the Middle Ages, unfortunately, and we have to engage with them as well. And people are damaged, and there's bacteria, tiny little things that will kill you, and you don't even know they're there. And it's like, we've got to live with all that. And our own self, our own past, our own hurts. And yet, despite all that, that can turn into something better.
yes,
And you get a chance to go, okay, how can I turn me into something better?
exactly. But it hits me how much it comes down again to a choice over how do we relate to these very bittersweet, but epically incredible, let's say, feats of evolution and this human experience, and kind of tie it together. What we both obviously want to inspire is for spirituality and for your spiritual guide or spiritual paradigm, to that we have to choose to encourage each other to have that optimistic take. So rather than looking at the dimension of the psyche and saying and denigrating it, it takes conscious choice to say it's something that's bittersweet, but it's significant, and
Yeah.
it's something to savor as precious. And that doesn't happen a lot in the spirituality that's so popular today. But I keep coming back to it as this is a choice. This is like a call to consider the profound difference it makes when you make a choice to view these things.
It's nuts, isn't it, really? Because I feel like what you're doing and what I'm doing as well is crazy, because it's like it's going up to folks who have got a very negative view of the world or themselves as an illusion, or they've got to, and going, have you considered that you might be really important? Have you considered that your life might be significant and that you really matter? And I think you're great. And despite everything, I know you've got your other side, but that you look pretty beautiful to me as well. And that's, yeah, why wouldn't we want to do that to each other?
exactly.
Why would you want to
Yeah,
go?
to consider the transformative effect of, hey, wait a minute, actually, your life does matter and can be significant if you shift your perspective this way, rather than, hey, your life really doesn't matter. And if you shift your perspective to see that more, then you'll be free. That's what you really need. So
Yeah.
that's just what's, I don't have words to express how just, yeah, how grateful I am for this perspective. And
There's a kind of, it's probably not the right word. In fact, I'd like to find a different word for it, but the word that comes to mind is macho. It's that there's that kind of, because I see it like, oh, you're not up to seeing how bad it really is. And you get that on all sides, not just the non-dual side. You can get that with the kind of no, life is meaningless, and then you die. And if you can't, if you're not up to seeing that, then you better get into some fantasy that it's okay.
yeah,
And the same on the non-dual side, but in a different thing. And there's a way out, but it's essentially the same. And what I'm wanting to do, why I'm dedicating every moment that I can to this philosophy, is to go, no, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. This optimistic view is not just pie in the sky wishful thinking that you've just, don't look at how bad it is, just like, no, it's good. The opposite. You're not looking at the nature of existence here. And if you do, it will blow you away. And then and this can hold up intellectually. We can work out ways to understand this, which when you push them really hard, they'll still stand up.
yeah,
And you can have confidence, not that you've arrived at the final understanding of anything, because it'll change, and I hope within 20 years there'll be something better. But you will see that it's robust, that it's not just an escape.
yeah.
It's a genuine statement of, no, the universe is an amazing place, and your life really does matter, and spiritual experiences are available to you in a life enhancing way that will fulfill your individuality, not undermine it.